"What makes you think you belong here?" sneered a voice in the room. Now imagine this: an unsolved equation had stumped Harvard's top minds, even the great Professor Whitmore himself. No one dared raise a hand, until a quiet 15-year-old farm boy from Georgia did just that. What happened next? Well, it stunned an entire room of elite scholars. But here's the real question: could raw talent and relentless determination break through centuries of prestige and gatekeeping? You won't believe the twists in this true-to-life inspired story. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. It was a rare, crisp autumn morning in Cambridge. The leaves of Harvard Yard painted the ancient brick buildings in hues of amber and crimson. The air buzzed with a mix of ambition and entitlement as the annual Harvard Invitational Mathematics Colloquium commenced. This was no ordinary event. Attendees included some of the brightest young minds from elite preparatory schools, university undergrads, and even a few distinguished professors. Among them, the towering figure of Professor Nathaniel Whitmore stood out. At 58, Whitmore was a living legend in the field of applied mathematics. His published papers were revered, his lectures often standing room only. But with the respect came arrogance. He carried himself with an air of superiority, well aware of his own status. In the packed hall of Sanders Theatre, students from prestigious academies whispered excitedly. Rumor had it that Whitmore would be presenting an unsolved equation today, a particularly brutal problem from his latest research on nonlinear differential equations in quantum mechanics. Many had traveled from across the country just for this moment. Near the back of the room sat a 15-year-old African-American boy, lanky and awkward in clothes that didn't quite fit the Harvard aesthetic. Denim overalls and a worn jacket set him apart from the designer blazers and cashmere sweaters. His name was Elijah Freeman, a quiet farm boy from a small town in Georgia. He had won a regional mathematics competition run by a nonprofit, the prize being an invitation to this colloquium. Elijah's seat had not come easily. When he first arrived that morning, an administrator glanced at his tattered invitation letter and muttered, "Are you sure you're in the right place, son?" No one offered him a greeting, let alone a welcome. Several attendees looked him over with amused curiosity, others simply ignored him. But Elijah paid them no mind. His mind was sharp, his passion for numbers unyielding. His mother always told him, "Let your work speak for you." The hall gradually settled as Whitmore took the stage. "Welcome, esteemed guests," he began, his deep voice resonating. "Today, I present to you an equation that has defeated even the most brilliant minds in our field. It lies at the frontier of quantum wave propagation." He turned to the chalkboard and, with swift movements, filled it with dense symbols and notations. The equation sprawled across the entire board, an intricate web of integrals, summations, and abstract operators. He clicked a button, and a projection screen mirrored the same equation. A murmur spread through the audience. Some students began furiously scribbling in notebooks, others stared in bafflement. Whitmore allowed the tension to build before speaking again. "I have worked on this for over 2 years. My colleagues at MIT and Stanford have reviewed it. No solution has yet been found. I challenge any of you to offer an approach." For several moments, the room was silent. Then a bold voice rang out from one of the front rows. "Professor Whitmore, if you can't solve it, what makes you think anyone else here can?" The speaker was Charles Wentworth III, a Harvard senior from old money and academic prestige. His polished manner oozed confidence and condescension. The audience laughed appreciatively. Whitmore gave a thin smile. "A fair point, Mr. Wentworth. Still, intellectual humility demands we try." He waited. Several older students rose to the challenge, walking up to the board one by one. Each tried to manipulate part of the equation, some proposing elaborate substitutions or transformations. None made progress. After nearly an hour, even the brightest contenders shook their heads and returned to their seats, defeated. Whitmore clasped his hands behind his back. It appears we have reached the limits of our combined intellect. The words dripped with smug satisfaction. His gaze swept the room, then settled, momentarily, on Elijah in the back row. He frowned. "Young man," Whitmore called out, voice slicing through the murmurs. Yes, you in the overalls. Why are you here?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Elijah's heart thudded in his chest, but he stood slowly. "Sir, my name is Elijah Freeman." Whitmore cut him off. "No need for introductions. This is an advanced mathematical forum. I assume you wandered in by mistake." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elijah felt the sting of humiliation but remained calm. He met Whitmore's gaze. "I won a place here through the Southeastern Math Talent Program." His voice was quiet but steady. Whitmore arched an eyebrow. "Well then, Mr. Freeman, I hope the experience is educational. Perhaps next time, regional winners should observe rather than attempt participation." More laughter followed. A few professors exchanged knowing looks. But Elijah sat back down without protest. He opened his notebook and began to study the equation with intense focus. For the next half hour, the session meandered. No one made headway. Whitmore eventually sighed. "It is a shame, but today's lesson is perhaps not about solving the unsolvable, but understanding the beauty of the challenge." The crowd began gathering their things. Yet in the back row, Elijah's pencil kept moving. His mind raced, not with arrogance, but clarity. Patterns emerged where others saw chaos. Possibilities formed where others saw dead ends. He flipped back to earlier notes, tricks his late grandfather, once a math teacher, had taught him. Subtle symmetries whispered from the edges of the equation. His hand trembled, not with fear, but urgency. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised it. All eyes swung toward him. For the second time, the room went utterly still. "Professor Whitmore," Elijah said, voice low but resonant. "I believe there is a way to simplify this." Gasps echoed through the hall. Whitmore blinked in disbelief. "You think you have an approach?" He laughed sharply. "Very well, Mr. Freeman. The floor is yours. Entertain us." And with that, the stage was set. The air grew thick with tension. No one was laughing now. A hush gripped the theater as Elijah stood. He could feel the weight of every gaze pressing against him, curious students, skeptical professors, the indifferent, and the condescending alike. He gripped his small spiral notebook tightly as he made his way toward the stage. Each step echoed in his ears. Professor Whitmore leaned casually against the lectern, arms crossed, a bemused smirk playing on his face. To him, this was already a spectacle, a farm boy playing at mathematics in the grand halls of Harvard. "You may proceed, Mr. Freeman," Whitmore said, gesturing to the chalkboard, still filled with the sprawling equation. "I do hope you brought chalk." A few snickers fluttered through the crowd. Elijah ignored them. He reached for a fresh piece of chalk and stood before the board. His mind was calm now, the earlier sting of dismissal faded beneath a wave of concentration. He started speaking, not grandly, not boastfully, but clearly. "I noticed," he began, "that the kernel in this integral term resembles a shifted Gaussian. If we consider the quantum wave function's real part as an even function, then..." His hand moved swiftly, erasing part of the board and rewriting with smoother, more intuitive forms. His fingers, rough from farm work, drew elegant symbols with surprising precision. He introduced a change of variables, subtle but elegant, and with each line, the equation began to shed its intimidating complexity. At first, the audience watched in detached amusement. Then, one by one, the expressions shifted. Notebooks were hastily reopened. Pens scribbled. A graduate student from Princeton leaned forward, whispering, "Wait, that's a legitimate transform." Professor Whitmore's brow furrowed. He straightened, arms unfolding. The room's energy changed, skepticism gave way to intrigue. Elijah spoke slowly, explaining each step as he went. By exploiting this symmetry and applying a Fourier transform here, he continued, we can reduce the convolution into a simpler product in frequency space. That allows us to isolate the nonlinear term and treat it iteratively. More heads nodded. A young woman from Caltech blinked in surprise. That. I didn't see that pathway at all. Charles Wentworth III, arms crossed at the front, frowned deeply, fingers tapping against his notebook. His earlier smirk had vanished. Whitmore interrupted for the first time. Where did you learn that technique? He asked sharply. Elijah glanced at him briefly. My grandfather taught me. He was a math teacher in Georgia. Showed me how to look for hidden symmetries. The professor said nothing, but his frown deepened. With growing confidence, Elijah advanced further. He now had erased nearly a third of the original equation, replacing it with streamlined terms that logically followed from one to the next. The impossibility of the problem began to melt away in real time. The room, once filled with quiet condescension, was now taut with attention. No one moved. No one whispered. The very air seemed to hum with anticipation. Elijah reached the heart of the equation, the term that had confounded even Professor Whitmore. Finally, Elijah said softly, if we apply the modified Green's function here, and consider the limit as time approaches infinity. His chalk moved with careful certainty. A collective intake of breath rippled through the audience. Then, there it was. The core solution emerged, stark and elegant. What had once been a mess of symbols resolved into a crisp, comprehensible form. For several long seconds, silence ruled the hall. Then, from the left side of the room, a professor from Yale whispered aloud, my God, he's right. The spell broke. Voices burst forth in a wave. How did he see that? That's genius. I never thought to combine Fourier with Green's in that context. Professor Whitmore's face had gone pale. Slowly, he approached the board, examining the work line by line. He traced Elijah's solution with his finger, expression unreadable. This is. Whitmore cleared his throat, voice strained. This is an insightful approach. Quite unorthodox, but valid. He turned to Elijah. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something harder to define, reluctant respect, perhaps tinged with dismay. The audience, meanwhile, began to stir. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. A few in the back began clapping quietly, then more followed, until a wave of applause filled the theater. Elijah stepped back from the board, wiping his chalk-dusted hands on his jeans. He looked out at the sea of faces, not with triumph, but with calm humility. His work had spoken for him, just as his mother had taught. As the applause swelled, Professor Whitmore raised a hand to silence the crowd. He faced Elijah again. Young man, he said carefully, you have surprised us all. Your insight deserves recognition. Another ripple of astonishment passed through the room. Professor Whitmore, acknowledging a farm boy in overalls. It was unprecedented. But before Whitmore could continue, an older woman, Dr. Helen Abrams, a visiting professor from Oxford, stood and addressed the hall. This, she said, voice ringing clear, is why we must never assume intellect belongs only to pedigree or privilege. Today, Mr. Freeman reminded us of that truth. The crowd burst into fresh applause, louder this time, genuine. Elijah stood in the center of it all, quiet and composed. The tide had turned, but only just. He sensed that more would come, both good and bad. For now, though, the farmer boy had stunned Harvard. And the day was far from over. The applause lingered long after Elijah returned to his seat. His heart pounded beneath his simple shirt, but outwardly he remained still, eyes on the now altered chalkboard. His solution held firm. The complex equation that had stymied the brightest minds of the Ivy League was no longer unsolved. It stood tamed, by a 15-year-old farm boy from Georgia. Yet in the upper reaches of Sanders Theater, not all eyes shone with admiration. In a side alcove, behind the thick velvet curtain, a cluster of faculty and visiting scholars gathered, Professor Whitmore among them. His face was composed, but tension knotted his jaw. He rubbed his temple absently, the chalk smudge on his sleeve forgotten. Dr. Helen Abrams approached him with a light smile. "Well, Nathaniel, it seems fresh eyes have bested us." Whitmore gave a stiff nod. "An unexpected result, certainly." His gaze drifted toward Elijah, still seated quietly in the back row, notebook on his lap. Charles Wentworth III, lingering at the edge of the group, scoffed under his breath. "Beginner's luck. He probably memorized a trick. No way he understands the depth of what he did." Helen's smile faded. "Careful, Charles. Dismissing talent because it comes from an unexpected source is how genius gets missed." Charles offered a tight smile, but his eyes burned with something colder than envy. Across the room, invitations to an impromptu reception for select attendees began circulating. Elijah watched quietly as neatly printed cards were passed from hand to hand, white cards with gold lettering, "Exclusive faculty reception, today, 2 p.m., Fellman Lounge." He was not offered one. Instead, an assistant approached with a small, forced smile. "Mr. Freeman, thank you for attending. The student session has now concluded. I'm sure you'll want to catch your shuttle back." Elijah stood slowly, folding his notebook. "Actually, ma'am," he said softly, "I'd like to observe the next session, if that's allowed." The assistant hesitated. "Well, I suppose, but it may be a bit advanced." Elijah nodded. "That's fine." She pursed her lips but gave no further protest. Still, as Elijah made his way toward the hall exit, eyes followed him, not with curiosity now, but calculation. Some whispered. A few professors leaned toward each other, voices low. "He's entirely unschooled in formal proof structure. No pedigree, no record of mentorship. And from some rural program. Can we trust the rigor?" Whitmore remained silent through the murmurs, but his mind raced. His reputation had taken a public bruise. In the eyes of Harvard's mathematical elite, an unknown boy had done what he could not. Worse, it was already spreading. He saw the flashes of phones, the excited tweets being typed. As the group moved toward the reception, Whitmore motioned for Charles to linger. The two stood by the side stairwell. "You were dismissive earlier, Charles," Whitmore said quietly. "And that cost us." Charles bristled. "With respect, sir, this boy isn't trained. What happened up there could have been coincidence. Give him harder ground to cover, he'll stumble." Whitmore considered. "Perhaps. Or perhaps not." His voice lowered further. "In either case, we cannot allow a single display to eclipse the prestige of this institution. There is balance to be maintained." Charles grinned thinly. "Leave that to me." Meanwhile, unaware of the whispered schemes, Elijah wandered through the hallowed halls. He stopped by the great library, its shelves towering, ancient tomes looming like giants. He ran his fingers along cracked spines, feeling the centuries of knowledge. A few students recognized him and whispered, some with admiration, others with disdain. He found a quiet table near the back, opened his notebook, and began reviewing his work. Not from pride, but from discipline. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind, "Understand why your solution works, not just that it works." Hours passed. Outside, the reception unfolded with wine glasses clinking, careful laughter rising. Professor Whitmore, glass in hand, mingled with donors and deans. Charles worked the room too, planting quiet doubts. He lacks rigor. No mentorship. Likely a one-time fluke. But even amid the cultivated skepticism, a few dissenting voices remained. Dr. Abrams approached Whitmore again. "You must admit, what that boy did was extraordinary. We should be encouraging him." Whitmore swirled his wine. "Perhaps. But the academic world requires more than flashes of insight. It demands consistency, foundation. Helen tilted her head. Or perhaps it demands the humility to recognize brilliance where it appears. Before Whitmore could answer, an assistant hurried over, voice urgent. "Professor, there's a request from Dean Halvorsen. He heard about the incident and wants to meet the student privately. Now." Whitmore's grip tightened on his glass. The dean? Already? Things were moving too fast. Back in the library, Elijah remained unaware, until a soft voice interrupted him. "Mr. Freeman." He looked up to see a young staff member, out of breath. "Dean Halvorsen would like to see you. This way, please." Elijah closed his notebook, rose without hesitation, and followed. The corridors seemed longer now, more shadowed. In the distance, he glimpsed Professor Whitmore watching him pass, expression unreadable. The real test, Elijah sensed, was only beginning. Elijah's steps echoed softly through the polished marble corridors. The assistant led him past soaring archways and beneath gilded plaques, each marking some honored moment in Harvard's storied history. The farther they walked, the more distant the bustle of the colloquium seemed. The boy's heart beat steadily, nervous, but not afraid. Ahead stood a wide oak door bearing a brass plaque, Dean Edmund Halvorsen, School of Mathematics. The assistant knocked twice and pushed the door open. "Mr. Freeman, sir," she announced, then stepped aside. Dean Halvorsen rose from behind a massive desk of dark mahogany. A tall man with white hair and sharp eyes, he radiated an old-world authority, imposing but not unkind. He motioned Elijah inside. "Come in, young man. Close the door." Elijah obeyed, stepping carefully onto the rich Persian rug. He remained standing, unsure whether to speak. The dean studied him for a moment. "Elijah Freeman, is it?" "Yes, sir." "Sit." Elijah sat in the large leather chair facing the desk. It creaked faintly beneath his lean frame. He clasped his hands on his lap, notebook tucked under his arm. Dean Halvorsen steepled his fingers. "You caused quite a stir today, Mr. Freeman." Elijah kept his gaze steady. "I didn't mean to cause a stir, sir. I just saw a way through the problem." The dean gave a small chuckle. "Modesty. Good. But you must understand, what you did was no small thing. That equation has defeated postdocs and tenured faculty alike. Even Professor Whitmore admitted your solution was insightful." Elijah said nothing. He knew when to listen. Halvorsen's expression grew more thoughtful. "Tell me, where did you learn to think this way? Surely your high school doesn't teach advanced Fourier transforms." "My grandfather taught me, sir," Elijah replied softly. "He was a math teacher before he retired. And I study on my own when I finish chores on the farm." The dean's brow rose. "Self-taught, mostly?" "Yes, sir. I read textbooks from the county library. And online." Halvorsen leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping thoughtfully. "Remarkable." A long pause followed. Then the dean's tone sharpened slightly. "But here is the reality, Mr. Freeman. In our world, talent alone is not enough. There are pathways, credentials, traditions. You lack those." Elijah's hands tightened slightly on his notebook. "I understand." Halvorsen studied him further. "That said, we cannot ignore brilliance when we see it. I would like to offer you an informal mentorship, access to Harvard's online resources, invitations to select advanced seminars." Elijah's eyes widened. "That would be an honor, sir. But," the dean continued, voice cool, "you must understand this is unusual. There will be resistance. Some here are protective of their ranks." Elijah nodded solemnly. "I understand that too." Halvorsen gave a brief smile. "Good. Now, before we proceed, there's one more thing." He opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder. An anonymous concern has been raised. Elijah's heart quickened. Halvorsen flipped open the folder. Inside were printouts of online posts, emails, and a neatly typed note, unverified background. Possible unauthorized help. No documented coursework. Risk of misrepresentation. Halvorsen's eyes locked on Elijah. I want to hear it from you. Did anyone assist you with this problem? Were you coached? Elijah sat straighter, his voice firm. No, sir. The work is mine alone. The dean held his gaze for a long moment, then closed the folder with a snap. I believe you. Relief flickered through Elijah's chest. But not everyone will, Halvorsen added. Word spreads quickly. There are those who would see your success diminished. A knock came at the door. The assistant peeked in. Professor Whitmore to see you, sir. The dean nodded. Send him in. Whitmore entered, his bearing still regal, though his eyes flicked briefly to Elijah with unreadable intent. Dean Halvorsen, he greeted, voice composed. Anne. Mr. Freeman. Halvorsen gestured toward another chair. Join us, Nathaniel. We were discussing this morning's events. Whitmore seated himself, fingers steepled in imitation of the dean. Indeed. Quite an impressive performance by young Mr. Freeman. Though, questions remain, of course. Halvorsen's tone sharpened. He has assured me the work is entirely his. Whitmore inclined his head slightly. Naturally. Still, such flashes of insight can, sometimes be misleading. One correct solution does not prove lasting capability. I would recommend a more thorough evaluation. Halvorsen frowned. You propose a test. A series of them, Whitmore said smoothly. Privately. Let us determine if this brilliance holds under more rigorous scrutiny. The dean turned to Elijah. Mr. Freeman, would you accept such a challenge? Elijah met Whitmore's gaze, unflinching. Yes, sir. I would. Whitmore's lips curled faintly. Excellent. Then let us arrange it. Halvorsen rose. Very well. I will oversee this personally. He extended a hand to Elijah. You've earned this opportunity. Make the most of it. Elijah stood and shook the dean's hand. Thank you, sir. As he turned to leave, Whitmore's voice followed him. We shall see if today was genius, or luck. Elijah didn't respond. He stepped out into the corridor, notebook under one arm, heart steady. He would face whatever test they set. His mother's words echoed in his mind again, let your work speak for you. And soon, it would have to. 2 days later, a formal message arrived at the old inn where Elijah was staying. He had been too far from home to return immediately, so the nonprofit had arranged simple accommodations for him near the campus. The note was written on crisp Harvard letterhead and bore Dean Halvorsen's signature. Mr. Freeman, you are invited to participate in an advanced mathematics evaluation series. The first session will begin tomorrow at 9 a.m. in room 407, Whitmore Mathematics Building. Elijah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his notebook. The words were polite, but the meaning was clear. He was being tested. That evening, he spent hours in his room, reviewing everything he knew. Fourier analysis. Green's functions. Nonlinear dynamics. His old textbooks, ragged and well-loved, were spread across the desk beside his notebook. Though he'd brought only a few with him, they were his treasures. His grandfather's notes filled the margins. He studied late into the night, the dim lamp casting long shadows against the wooden walls. When exhaustion finally came, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what tests awaited him. The next morning, the Harvard campus seemed colder, the old brick facade somehow more austere. The Whitmore Mathematics Building loomed tall and quiet. Elijah entered alone, notebook in hand. Room 407 was a spacious, glass-walled seminar room. Already inside were Professor Whitmore, 3 senior faculty members, and 1 visiting scholar from MIT. Charles Wentworth III lounged near the back, a smug smile playing on his lips. Elijah approached the table at the front. A single chair and blank chalkboard awaited him. Whitmore gestured without preamble. "Please take your seat, Mr. Freeman." Elijah sat, placing his notebook beside him. Whitmore began. "You will be given 3 advanced problems today. Each addresses a different field: complex analysis, applied topology, and nonlinear systems. You may use the board and your notebook. You will have 45 minutes per problem. We will observe and evaluate." Elijah nodded. "I understand." The first problem appeared on the board, projected from a tablet, an intricate integral involving branch cuts in the complex plane. Elijah stood, reading it carefully. He inhaled slowly. This was no beginner's puzzle, it was deep and demanding. Without hesitation, he picked up the chalk and began. His methodical nature showed. He first annotated the problem, marking key symmetries. Then he began contour mapping, carefully avoiding the pitfalls that had likely been built into the problem. The room grew silent except for the soft scratch of chalk. One of the observing professors leaned forward slightly. Another scribbled a quick note. Charles, arms crossed, frowned deeper with each passing minute. 35 minutes in, Elijah completed the solution, boxed it neatly, and stepped back. It was correct. Not only correct, elegant. Whitmore's face remained impassive. He rose and switched the screen. Problem 2. This one was harder, far harder. A complex topology problem involving surfaces of genus greater than 3 and an unexpected constraint. Elijah's brow furrowed. He reviewed it slowly, parsing the hidden structure. His mind spun through the tools at his disposal. Homology. No, that wouldn't cut deep enough. He needed a better view. Again, his grandfather's voice came to him: "When stuck, change your perspective." Elijah moved to a fresh section of the board. He began sketching a 3D model, rotating the surface mentally, visualizing its properties. Slowly, insight dawned. He found the invariant that unlocked the rest. Piece by piece, the tangled web of the problem began to unravel. 40 minutes in, he reached the solution. There was quiet murmuring now among the professors. The MIT scholar gave a low whistle. Whitmore, jaw set, advanced to the final problem: nonlinear systems, the very field in which the boy had stunned them days before. This time, the problem was brutal, a coupled set of differential equations, designed to confound intuition. Elijah stared at it, pulse steady. He began working, first slowly, testing assumptions. Then with more confidence. He spotted the decoupling transform buried within the problem's structure. It wasn't clean, but it was workable. With calm determination, he pressed on, manipulating the equations, balancing terms, until, 44 minutes in, the solution appeared. He boxed it neatly and stepped back once more. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Whitmore stood, clearing his throat. "You may sit, Mr. Freeman." Elijah returned to his seat, breathing evenly. The faculty whispered quietly among themselves. Then Dean Halvorson himself entered, having been called to witness the conclusion. "Well?" the dean asked. Dr. Abrams, one of the few who had openly supported Elijah, spoke first. "Sir, his work is correct. On all 3 problems. His process is sound, his reasoning clear." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "It is an impressive display. One that warrants further observation." Halvorson turned to Elijah. "You have exceeded expectations again, Mr. Freeman. We cannot deny what we have seen today." Elijah gave a respectful nod. "Thank you, sir." But not all in the room shared the sentiment. Charles stood abruptly. "A test in isolation means little. He's had days to prepare." Real academic work demands consistency across many forms. Halvorsen frowned. And yet none of our own students solved today's problems so swiftly. Charles's eyes narrowed, but he said no more. Whitmore gathered his papers. We will convene again soon. Mr. Freeman will be invited to an advanced workshop this weekend. We will see what further talents emerge. Elijah stood. I'll be there. As he left the room, he felt the eyes upon him, some curious, some admiring, some hostile. The tests had only begun. And the path ahead would be harder still. Word of Elijah's performance spread swiftly through the halls of Harvard. Whispers filled classrooms and corridors. The farm boy did it again. 3 for 3 on the toughest problems they threw at him. Whitmore isn't pleased. Elijah heard none of this. He spent the next day in quiet study at the library, focused only on what lay ahead, the so-called advanced workshop. He didn't trust the invitation. It smelled too much like another trial, another test designed to trip him up. But he wasn't about to back down. Early Saturday morning, Elijah arrived at the appointed room in the mathematics building, an austere space with high windows and a polished blackboard that gleamed like obsidian. Around a large conference table sat 10 individuals, 6 Harvard faculty members, 2 visiting scholars, and 2 students, Charles Wentworth III among them. Elijah was the youngest person in the room by a decade. Whitmore stood at the head of the table, cool and composed. Welcome, all, he began. Today's workshop is intended to foster advanced mathematical discussion. However, he continued, glancing briefly at Elijah, we will also consider practical demonstrations of problem-solving under real-world conditions. Elijah took his seat without a word. His eyes scanned the room. No smiles met him, only thin, expectant stares. He could feel it, this was no ordinary workshop. This was a gauntlet. Whitmore continued. The format today will be collaborative problem-solving in small groups. You will be given partial information and must work toward a full solution together. We will observe not only final results, but your process. Charles's smile returned, cold and sharp. He was seated in Elijah's assigned group. Not by accident. Whitmore handed out sealed folders. You may begin. Elijah opened his folder. Inside lay a complex systems model, chaotic dynamics, incomplete parameters, multiple unknowns. It was dense and messy, and it had been crafted deliberately to sow confusion. Charles leaned back smugly. So, farm boy, he murmured. Ready to play with the big kids? Elijah ignored him. He began annotating the problem quietly. The group dynamics quickly soured. Charles dominated the conversation, dismissing Elijah's early observations. That's irrelevant. You're misapplying the method. Stick to what you know, which isn't much. Others followed Charles's lead, eager to curry favor. Elijah found himself isolated, his contributions waved away. Still, he worked. While they bickered and postured, he probed the problem's hidden layers, seeking the key. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The group remained tangled in false leads. Elijah spotted it first, a resonance term buried deep in the chaotic variables. Subtle, but critical. It would unlock the entire model. He spoke up calmly. I think if we consider the third-order interaction here, Charles cut him off. Wrong approach. I've already checked it. He turned to the others. Let's stay focused. Don't waste time. Whitmore, observing from the side, said nothing. He let the scene play out. But Elijah wouldn't be silenced. He stood, moved to the board, and wrote the term carefully. You missed this resonance. It shifts the system's behavior entirely. His chalk strokes were swift and clear. One by one, the variables aligned. The tangled mess began to reveal an elegant underlying pattern. The room quieted. Even Charles frowned, his earlier smugness faltering. That can't be. But it was. The solution unfolded cleanly before them. At the back, one of the visiting scholars whispered, "Incredible." Whitmore's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, voice neutral. "Well done, Mr. Freeman. Though I note the exercise was intended to be collaborative." Elijah met his gaze calmly. "I tried." Whitmore gave no reply. The workshop moved on to a second exercise, this time in modular forms. Again, the group dynamics turned hostile. Charles doubled down, eager to trip Elijah. He proposed false leads, misstated definitions, all in an attempt to confuse. But Elijah held steady. His grandfather's lessons had trained him well: patience, precision. Let the truth of the work speak louder than the noise. He worked quietly, methodically, checking each term with care. And again, his solution rose above the confusion: clean, correct, undeniable. By the third exercise, the room's mood had shifted. The faculty exchanged glances. The scholars leaned forward eagerly. Even Charles's bravado cracked, sweat dotted his brow. When the final problem was solved, once again by Elijah's calm hand, a silence settled over the room. Dean Halvorsen entered moments later, having observed part of the workshop from the hallway. "Well," the dean said dryly, surveying the board. "It appears young Mr. Freeman has outperformed expectations yet again." No one contradicted him. Whitmore remained stoic, but his eyes burned with frustration. His carefully laid trap had failed. The farm boy had bested them all, openly, unavoidably. As the room emptied, Halvorsen pulled Elijah aside. "You've proven your ability under fire, Mr. Freeman. You've earned more than access now." Elijah tilted his head, curious. Halvorsen continued. "I will recommend a special scholarship review for you. If approved, it would allow early admission, with full standing." Elijah's breath caught. Harvard itself. A chance he'd never dared imagine. But as they spoke quietly, Charles lingered at the door, eyes dark with spite. He wasn't finished, not yet. The harder tests, Elijah knew, were still to come. The days that followed the workshop passed in a blur for Elijah. Word of his performance had spread far beyond Harvard Yard. Mentions of the farm boy genius appeared in student forums and whispered conversations. Some called him brilliant. Others called him lucky. A few said nothing at all, an omission that spoke louder than words. Dean Halvorsen had moved quickly. He met with the scholarship committee and laid out his recommendation: early admission, special standing, full scholarship. "His talent is undeniable," the dean insisted. "We owe it to the field, and to the ideals of this institution, to nurture such a mind." But not all were so eager to welcome Elijah into their ranks. Professor Whitmore remained silent in official channels but made no effort to support the motion. Behind the scenes, doubts continued to spread. The words were always careful, always polite, but their intent was clear. How do we verify this boy's true background? He comes from a rural district with little oversight. Could someone have coached him from behind the scenes? Charles Wentworth III led the quieter campaign. He met with fellow students, influential alumni, and even certain faculty who shared his distaste for outsiders disrupting their world. One evening, Charles composed an anonymous message, sending it to several key professors and the admissions office. Significant irregularities remain in Mr. Freeman's record. No formal coursework, unverifiable prior testing. Caution is advised before granting him full admission. The whispers grew. Elijah, unaware of these shadow efforts, continued his quiet routine, rising early, studying at the library, walking the campus alone. The world remained cool toward him. A few curious students approached, mostly international scholars who admired raw talent. But many others kept their distance. Late one afternoon, as Elijah was deep in a topology text, Dr. Helen Abrams found him in the far corner of the library. She sat across from him without preamble. "Elijah," she said softly, "you must know, there are those working to block your admission." Elijah looked up calmly. I figured. Helen tilted her head, impressed. You're not surprised? No, ma'am, he replied. I know what this place is to them. A boy like me isn't supposed to be here. Her gaze softened. You belong here. But you will have to fight for it. Elijah nodded. I can do that. Helen leaned closer. There's more. They've arranged a final evaluation. They'll frame it as another workshop, but it's not. It's designed to trip you. If you fail, even once, they'll have their excuse. Elijah closed his book gently. When is it? 2 days from now. It's being run under the provost's office, but make no mistake, it's Whitmore's doing. He's pulling every string he can. Elijah absorbed this quietly. I'll be ready. Helen's eyes gleamed with admiration. You are braver than many I've met here. 2 days later, Elijah arrived once more at the Whitmore Mathematics Building. This time, the air was different, charged, expectant. The so-called final workshop had drawn a larger audience. Not just faculty, but graduate students, visiting scholars, and even a few reporters had gathered outside the room. Word had spread far and fast. Inside, the setup was coldly precise: 1 table, 1 chair, 1 board. A single large envelope rested at the center. Professor Whitmore stood by the window, arms crossed. Charles lurked near the back, watching with predatory interest. Dean Halvorsen entered last, his face unreadable. He approached Elijah quietly. You know what this is? Yes, sir, Elijah answered simply. The dean nodded. Do your best. That is all anyone can ask. Whitmore called the room to order. We begin now. He gestured toward the envelope. Inside is a multi-part proof problem, designed to test both depth and breadth. You will have 3 hours. Elijah stepped forward, opened the envelope, and drew out the pages. The problem was vicious. It combined elements from algebraic geometry, measure theory, and abstract logic, fields rarely mixed in this way. Clearly designed to confuse, to trap him. Elijah's brow furrowed, but he felt no fear. He began as he always did, slowly, methodically, seeking the pattern beneath the chaos. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The room was silent except for the scratch of his pencil and the occasional whisper from the audience. Whitmore watched closely. Charles smirked, certain this would be the boy's undoing. But as the second hour passed, something remarkable unfolded. Elijah's page after page of careful reasoning began revealing the structure of the problem. He bypassed the false leads, skirted the traps, and honed in on the core truth. By the third hour, his board was filled with an elegant, flowing proof, complex, yes, but coherent and clear. When time was called, Elijah stepped back, chalk in hand. The room was utterly still. Dean Halvorsen approached first, scanning the work. He said nothing, but a faint smile touched his lips. Dr. Abrams whispered to a colleague, he's done it. Even Whitmore, face tight with frustration, could not openly dismiss what stood before them. You performed well, Mr. Freeman, the professor said curtly. Unexpectedly so. Elijah simply nodded. Thank you, sir. As the room began to buzz with conversation, Charles stalked out silently, his plans unraveled once again. Halvorsen placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. I will convene the committee tomorrow. You've more than earned their vote. For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope rose in Elijah's chest. But even now, he knew, the final word had not yet been spoken. The halls of power moved slowly, and not always fairly. The morning air was heavy with anticipation. Word of Elijah Freeman's final evaluation had swept across campus and beyond. By the time the committee prepared to meet, everyone from graduate students to tenured faculty, and even members of the broader academic community, was watching. For many, it was no longer about a single student. It had become a question of principle. Could Harvard open its doors to an underappreciated boy from a Georgia farm, without the right pedigree, without the right connections? Dean Halvorsen arrived early at the committee room, a solemn chamber paneled in dark oak. The admissions committee had gathered, 12 voting members, including senior faculty, administrators, and alumni representatives. At the far end of the table, Professor Whitmore sat rigid, his expression unreadable. Halvorsen opened the meeting with calm authority. "Colleagues, we are here today to consider the candidacy of Mr. Elijah Freeman for early admission under special academic standing." He laid out the facts methodically: the boy's surprise solution at the colloquium, his flawless performance on the individual tests, his remarkable resilience at the so-called workshop. "He has exceeded every standard we have presented," the dean concluded. "He deserves a place here." At first, the room was quiet. Then the undercurrent of resistance emerged. Dr. Marcus Wells, a senior professor and staunch traditionalist, spoke first. "Dean Halvorsen, no one denies the boy's intelligence. But Harvard is not simply a place for flashes of brilliance. It is a tradition of rigor, of preparation. Mr. Freeman lacks formal training. No coursework, no accredited background. How will he manage here?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Another member added, "There is also the question of precedent. If we make exceptions here, what message does that send to the hundreds of qualified applicants who have followed the proper path?" Whitmore finally spoke, voice calm but cool. "I have no personal animus toward the boy. His abilities are clear. But one must ask, will such a candidate thrive, or flounder under the weight of expectation?" Halvorsen's voice sharpened. "Or are we afraid of disrupting our comfortable hierarchies?" For a moment, silence reigned. Then Dr. Helen Abrams leaned forward. "I will remind this committee, Elijah Freeman did not merely solve difficult problems. He did so under pressure, in hostile circumstances, and with a level of clarity rarely seen even among our doctoral candidates. If this institution stands for intellectual merit, we cannot turn him away." A tense debate followed. Arguments circled, pedigree versus talent, tradition versus fairness. It was not a question of ability anymore. It was politics. Outside the chamber, word of the debate spread. Students gathered in clusters. Some cheered for Elijah, others scoffed. "He embarrassed them," one senior whispered. "That's why they won't admit him." "But if they block him," another replied, "it'll be a scandal." The campus buzzed with tension. Reporters lingered outside administrative buildings, sniffing for a story. In his small room at the inn, Elijah waited alone, notebook on his lap. He knew nothing of the specifics, but he could feel it. The forces arrayed against him. The battle still being fought, far from chalkboards and numbers. Hours passed. Inside the committee room, the debate finally came to a head. Dean Halvorsen stood. "Enough. We will proceed to a formal vote. The motion, to admit Mr. Elijah Freeman under special academic standing with full scholarship. All in favor?" The room held its breath. Hands rose, 6. All opposed? 4 hands. Abstentions? 2 hands, Whitmore's among them. Halvorsen's voice rang out. "By majority vote, the motion passes." Relief rippled through part of the room. Others remained stone-faced. Whitmore said nothing, but his eyes burned cold. Outside, the news spread swiftly. A junior faculty member texted, "He's in. The farm boy made it." By evening, students were buzzing with the news. Supporters gathered outside the mathematics building, and reporters published early headlines. At the inn, there was a knock on Elijah's door. It was Dean Halvorsen. "Congratulations, Mr. Freeman. The vote passed. You are now formally admitted." Elijah stood slowly, stunned but calm. "Thank you, sir." Halvorsen extended his hand. "You earned it. And more importantly, you changed us. But even as the victory settled, Elijah sensed the undercurrent. He could feel it, not everyone would welcome him. And the hardest part was still ahead, proving, every day, that he belonged. Elijah's first official day as a Harvard student dawned cold and gray, clouds hanging low over the campus. The ancient stones of the yard seemed to watch him as he crossed beneath their gaze, backpack slung over one shoulder, notebook in hand. Official admission had come with new burdens, a whirlwind of paperwork, a move from the small into temporary student housing, and orientation materials thicker than some of his math texts. But none of that worried Elijah. What did was this, walking into his first advanced mathematics seminar. Room 5B in the Whitmore Mathematics Building. Professor Whitmore's classroom. He arrived early, as he always did. The room was empty except for rows of worn oak desks and the polished blackboard at the front. He chose a seat in the middle, not too forward to seem boastful, not too far back to seem timid. He opened his notebook and waited. Slowly, the other students arrived. Upperclassmen, most of them. Dressed in smart blazers, designer jeans, and expensive watches. They filed in, glancing at Elijah, some with curiosity, others with barely hidden disdain. The whispers began almost immediately. "That's the kid from Georgia. The one who embarrassed the prof. Doesn't even have AP credits. How did he get in?" Elijah kept his eyes on the board, jaw set. He had expected this. He was ready. Then Charles Wentworth III entered, swaggering in every step, and took a seat 2 rows ahead. His voice was loud enough to carry. "Careful, everyone. The prodigies are here. Hope you all brought your farm math." Laughter rippled through the room. Elijah remained still, pencil poised. At precisely 9 o'clock, Professor Whitmore entered. The room fell silent. He began without preamble. "This is Advanced Topics in Nonlinear Systems. If you are here by mistake, I suggest you leave now." His eyes flicked briefly to Elijah but moved on. The lecture began. Dense material, fast-paced, with little pause for questions. Most students scrambled to keep up, scribbling frantically. Elijah followed steadily, his pencil gliding across the page. Half an hour in, Whitmore paused at a particularly brutal derivation. "This term," he said, tapping the board, "has proven troublesome in past years. Does anyone see a path forward?" The room hesitated. Students shifted awkwardly. No one spoke. Then, quietly, "I believe it can be simplified if we substitute using the boundary condition from the previous theorem." Heads turned. Elijah had raised his hand. Whitmore's face remained impassive. "Proceed." Elijah stood, walked calmly to the board, and laid out the substitution. Step by step, the tangled term unwound into a clean result. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one of the graduate students murmured, "He's right." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "Correct," he said curtly. "We will move on." The lecture resumed, faster now. Challenges flew thick and fast, but Elijah stayed with it, sometimes ahead. Each time he spoke, the tension in the room deepened. Some students grew resentful. Others, quietly impressed. When the session ended, students gathered their things quickly. Charles rose with deliberate slowness, looking back at Elijah. "Careful," he said with a smirk. "You might start thinking you belong here." Elijah met his gaze steadily. "I do belong here." Charles's smirk faded slightly. Outside, in the cool morning air, Elijah walked alone across the yard. He knew this was only the beginning. Each class, each hallway, each conversation would bring new tests, spoken or not. But that didn't matter. He had his place now. And he would not give it up. As he passed beneath the towering oaks, he remembered his grandfather's words again, "Let your work speak for you." And it would. Day by day. Step by step. Weeks passed. The autumn leaves fell in waves, carpeting the ancient courtyards of Harvard in gold and crimson. The sharp air carried both the weight of tradition and the faint crackle of change. For Elijah Freeman, life had settled into a rhythm. Early mornings in the library. Long hours in the math labs. Endless notebooks filled with dense symbols and careful proofs. Word of him continued to ripple across campus. Some still doubted. Some quietly admired. Most simply watched. Every seminar, every problem set, every class became a proving ground. In Professor Whitmore's course, the tension never fully eased. Whitmore remained coldly professional, rarely acknowledging Elijah's contributions, but never able to ignore them. More than once, Elijah's insight salvaged lectures that had veered into complexity. And with each quiet success, the whispers shifted. He's holding his own. Actually, more than holding. I heard even Whitmore had to reference his notes after the last session. One crisp morning, as Elijah left the mathematics building, a voice called after him. Mr. Freeman. He turned to see Dr. Helen Abrams approaching, coat drawn tight against the wind. She smiled. Word has come from the dean. You are being invited to present at the winter colloquium. Elijah blinked. Present? Me? Helen nodded. Yes. Your work on nonlinear stability has caught attention. The committee wants to hear it, from you. Elijah's heart thudded. It was the same stage where he had first stood, that morning weeks ago, in denim overalls. Now he would return, not as an outsider, but as a speaker. In the weeks that followed, he prepared carefully. He refined his proofs, crafted clear slides, and practiced his delivery. He wanted no doubts about who he was or what he could do. The morning of the colloquium arrived. Sanders Theater was packed once more, students, faculty, visiting scholars. Even the press had come, the story of the farm boy genius still circulating. Elijah stood backstage, notebook in hand. Dressed now in a simple but clean suit, his mother's words steady in his mind. Let your work speak for you. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall, please welcome Mr. Elijah Freeman. He stepped into the light. A sea of faces awaited him, some eager, some skeptical, some grudging. He saw Whitmore near the front, arms folded, watching intently. Charles, too, seated with a group of upperclassmen. Elijah took a deep breath and began. His voice was steady, his slides crisp. He explained his work clearly, each step grounded in solid logic. The complex concepts flowed with ease, transformations, stability theorems, nonlinear couplings, all presented with a clarity that commanded attention. Midway through, a renowned visiting scholar leaned toward a colleague. He's not just bright. He's the real thing. By the end, the room was silent with focus. And when Elijah concluded, quietly, humbly, the applause was immediate. Not polite, but real. Even Whitmore, after a long pause, joined in with a slow, measured clap. Later, as the crowd mingled in the reception hall, students and faculty approached Elijah, not with mockery, not with dismissal, but with genuine questions. How did you spot that invariant? Can you show me that transform again? What are you working on next? For the first time, Elijah was not merely allowed in the room. He had a seat at the table. Dean Halvorson found him amidst the crowd. Well done, Mr. Freeman. You've done more than earn your place, you've reminded us all what merit truly means. Elijah smiled quietly. Thank you, sir. Across the room, Whitmore watched the scene unfold. For a moment, his gaze met Elijah's. No words were exchanged, but the old tension had faded. In its place, the faintest flicker of something else, respect. And Charles? He remained in the background, smirk long vanished, now just another face in the crowd. As evening fell, Elijah walked alone beneath the ancient arches of Harvard Yard. The wind stirred the fallen leaves around his feet. Above, the great clock tower struck the hour. He had come here with nothing but a notebook and a love of numbers. Dismissed, doubted, tested again and again. Now, with steady steps, he walked forward. No longer the quiet farm boy in the back row. Now a scholar among scholars. And this was only the beginning. Dear friend, if this story touched you, if you believe talent can come from anywhere, regardless of background or privilege, then give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a little inspiration today. Remember, greatness isn't bound by status or wealth. Sometimes, it's a quiet voice in the back of the room, waiting for a chance to be heard. And if you'd love to hear more stories that celebrate perseverance, brilliance, and the human spirit, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. Let's keep uplifting voices that deserve to be heard. Together, we can make a difference.